The wind came crawling across the Colorado Badlands like a restless ancestor whispering warnings into the ears of anyone stubborn enough to listen, and Eli Tanner, a rancher whose heart had been half-starved by solitude, stood at the wooden rail of the frontier auction pen, feeling that whisper curling beneath his ribs, as if the land itself were fussing with him, urging him to pay attention to something about to rewrite the quiet narrative of his days. The crowd muttered in its own broken rhythm, traders counting coins, gamblers adjusting dusty hats, settlers fanning themselves with folded bills as the sun painted every face in a gritty bronze. Eli had come only to purchase feedstock and maybe a mule, nothing that should have involved destiny or heartbreak or the sensation that the ground was waiting to shake underneath him. But when the commotion in the far stall settled just enough for the auctioneer to bark for silence, and the gate was opened to reveal a young Apache woman being pushed into the open, Eli felt something inside him collapse like old timber. She stood tall, even with her wrists bound, chin lifted with a defiance that cracked through the air like dry lightning. Her eyes were dark, not the shade of night, but the shade of earth wet after rain, carrying stories the crowd was too coarse to understand. Around her upper arm lay a raised, circular scar, a burn etched with a pattern meant to mark ownership, and when the auctioneer spun her roughly to display it, she didn't flinch. Eli did. The world dimmed at the edges as if someone had shuttered a lantern inside him. He'd gathered under his collar, not the desert kind but the human kind, the kind that comes from shame, fury. The bidding began in a discordant clatter, coins flashing, voices rising, futures being decided by hands that trembled only with greed. Eli hadn't intended to raise his hand, but his arm rose anyway, as if guided by the wind that had been whispering to him since dawn. The crowd tried to bully the price higher, yet something in Eli's gaze made even the boldest ranchers hesitate, and within moments, the gavel slapped wood with a decisive finality that felt less like victory and more like the first note of an old song that had been waiting to be sung. When Eli walked to her, him at all, but she met his eyes with a steadiness that cracked his breath in half. She didn't answer, only watched him with a guarded stillness, like a falcon assessing the distance between a cliff and sky. The guard cut the rope binding her wrists. She didn't rub the red marks. She simply stepped free with quiet dignity, and Eli felt himself wordlessly vow never to let another rope touch her skin. As they walked away from the noise, from the shouting, from the metallic stench of commerce coated over human suffering, Eli dared to ask, "Does it hurt?" It was a foolish question, childish even, but the silence between them felt heavy with truths he wasn't prepared to carry. She stopped walking. Her shadow stretched beside his like to paths preparing to braid together, whether either of them wanted it or not. She lifted her arm. "It's not a tattoo," she said, voice low and steady, shaped like stone worn smooth by rivers. "It's a brand from the auction." The words hit Eli with the force of a storm crashing against a window, shattering whatever remained of his old life's calm. The land around them felt suddenly too large, too ancient to allow such cruelty to exist upon it. Eli swallowed hard, the desert tasting like metal on his tongue. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Her gaze softened, not in forgiveness but in acknowledgement, a simple flicker that told him she recognized sincerity when she saw it. They reached his horse, and he offered her the reins. She mounted with quiet assurance, reclaiming the height of someone who had never been meant to stand beneath anyone. Eli climbed behind her, careful not to crowd her space, letting the wind braid through the moment as they began the slow ride toward Tanner Ranch, a place that until now had been nothing more than a patch of land fenced in by loneliness. Along the trail, he spoke in fragments, telling her about the spring-fed creek, the apple grove, the old barn that complained during storms the way a grandfather grumbles in his sleep. She listened without answering, but every glance she cast toward the horizon felt like she was measuring the world for escape routes, or maybe possibilities. When they arrived, the ranch dogs circled warily but didn't bark, as if they sensed she carried a sovereignty older than the buildings themselves. Eli guided her to the porch where a kettle still simmered from dawn. "You're free here," he said, unsure whether the words were enough or even believable. She stepped to the edge of the porch, eyes sweeping over the fields, turning gold in the sinking sun. "Freedom is a path," she murmured, "not a place." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd survived more endings than beginnings. Eli found his throat tightening, something fragile and sorrowful pushing its way upward. The Apache woman regarded him with a quiet fierceness, a kind of sympathy that didn't coddle but understood. I never saw a rancher weep. Eli wasn't sure what broke him more, the fact that she noticed, or the fact that she sounded surprised that a man might care. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, muttering, "Some things deserve tears." She nodded, and for the first time, a trace of warmth touched her expression. As twilight poured over the ranch, they stood in a silence that felt like a treaty drafted in the air itself. Not ownership, not rescue, something else, something that whispered of healing stitched slowly over time, like scars that choose to fade rather than reignite. Eli realized that she had not decided yet whether to stay, and he wouldn't ask her to. So long starved of meaning, had shifted shape. It had become not a refuge, but a starting point, and the wind, that persistent ancestor trailing their stories since morning, carried the sense that both their lives had stepped onto a trail neither could foresee. The night deepened, and Eli Tanner, rancher, loner, accidental guardian, understood that whatever path lay ahead, as delicate and dangerous as trying to cup moonlight in bare hands. And for those hearing this tale around the world, wandering through their own storms and deserts, feel invited to stay with this journey as it unfolds. Subscribe, stay close, let the story keep writing beside you. Because what comes next will carry fire, redemption, and the kind of courage that echoes long after the saddle creaks into silence.